Welcome to Used Car News Podcast. Used Car News is your top source for fast and reliable news that car dealers can rely on for this evolving industry. Here are this month's top stories. Automotive analysts forecast industry going forward. Dealers prepare for state pushback on compliance. Auto industry examines the challenge of tariffs. But first, we sit down with Melinda Zabritski, Senior Director for Experian Automotive Financial Solutions Team.
Hello, welcome everyone. This is the Used Car News Podcast, and I'm Jeffrey Ballant, Managing Editor of Used Car News. And today we have one of our actually regular guests that we have over in the podcast, and this is Melinda Zabritski, Head of Automotive Financial Insights at Experian Automotive. Welcome, Melinda.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Great to be here. I appreciate you doing this. Yeah, she's our kind of a regular guest, one of our most regular guests, but it's really important stuff. Now, it's interesting because we usually talk with her more or less on a quarterly basis. Maybe we miss one once, but on automotive finance is kind of her expertise. And in the past, she's always has little some sort of section on EVs in that quarterly report. This year, though, they came out with a State of Automotive Finance Market Special Report, Electric Vehicles Year in Review for 2024. So this is very interesting. It's a report all its own on EVs. What prompted that, Melinda?
Well, there's always been so much focus on the EV market. And every once in a while, I do put together something focused just on EV, but it doesn't always get published out there. You know, sometimes we just use it for internal reference and, send to a few clients here and there. But we wanted to do something a little special, kind of geared up around NADA time, and especially moving into 2025 when there's a kind of a question mark over the EV space.
For sure.
In the new climate.
Now, let me answer this. I didn't prep you for this one. Just curious, you came from NADA and you released at NADA. I mean, was there any immediate feedback that you got on it, or was there anything that jumped out at you in terms of the response to the report?
It went out to a few publications, and unfortunately, I picked up a cold over NADA, so I was not able to spend as much time out there. But there was certainly interest. By several publications and by several folks focused on the EV space. So
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And for the record, listeners, Melinda and I commiserating, we kind of had to reschedule this twice. She was sick one time and then I was sick the second time. So we both feel each other's pain here. So, but I'm glad we can get to talk now. So, okay. In the report, I'm going to go in one of the first pages discusses EV increases what percentage of consumer retail, and it looks up it's 8.8% of all new consumer retail, correct?
That is correct.
And what do you on that chart? What was there anything in here that stood out to you in terms of because you have financing by fuel types? Obviously, ICE still dominates 74% of new financing, but electric now is at 9.3%, and gas electric hybrid is 9.45%.
Yeah, there's certainly been growth in both the EV space as well as the hybrid. They've both been growing quite a bit throughout the year, and especially year over year, there's been a lot of growth in the EV space. It's like up 33% or so. And I also looked at, the kind of EVs out there,
yes.
It's still very much dominated in the luxury space.
Right.
Some vehicles folks may or may not consider luxury that get classified as luxury, but it's still, about 70% luxury.
Isn't that something? Okay, cool. And you always break out maps about where, even on the regular financing side, you have a couple charts in here where new EVs are located. Of course, not unexpectedly, almost 30% are in California. I see like 8% in Texas, almost 8% in Florida. Now, what was interesting is I love that the chart you have next. There's a chart here you discuss new EV share of each state. Mm-hmm. So new EV share of cars purchased, correct?
That is correct. Of the new vehicles purchased, what percentage of them were electric?
Now, this is really interesting because you had California, of course, almost 23%. But I think about me here in Michigan, where we love our throaty ICE vehicles, and it was like 4.5 or 4.67%. So it was interesting to see those numbers. What stood out for you in these areas?
Well, a lot of adoption, the Western coast states, the Northeast, really strong adoption there as well. Washington was, almost 18%.
Yeah, yes.
I'm in Colorado and we're over 18%. So, a lot of that reputation about, battery health in cold states.
That's why I wanted to ask you, because I saw the Colorado and that really did stand out on this entire map.
Absolutely. And you also see, again, the Northeast, the coastal areas, you get a lot more concentration there. Not surprising, the Dakotas, very low levels of adoption. Right. I think a lot of that is, population as well as, distance between cities and towns and such.
Distance or payload or whatever that they got to deal with out there. Okay,
exactly.
This I found kind of interesting. The average score, credit score we're talking of EV buyers has been steadily declining. What do you think that's about?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's several things that lead to the decrease in credit scores. Now, they're still very prime credit scores.
Right. What are they like, the average rate?
Yeah, so for EV...
I'm looking like high 700s or mid 700s.
Yes. Yeah, so EVs were last year, it came down to 769, but it's down from, 777 the year before. And I think that decrease, a lot of it is due to, first of all, more market entrants. We have more vehicles coming into the market, especially even in the non-luxury segment. And with those tax credits, especially on the lease side, some of these monthly payments can be extremely low. So I think it's opening up the EV space for more consumers to adopt.
Oh, that's a great point. That's excellent. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Now, of course, this is always interesting on these things is how are new EVs being purchased? And over 44% were being leased, which makes sense, obviously, for pricing purposes. Now, on this chart, on this page, Melinda, I thought there was a couple things that was interesting. What was interesting is I see in 2024, 44% were leased. But why was it so low the year before? And really all through the few years, it was in the 20s. I would have thought leasing would have been high all the way around. What was it about that made it jump in 2024? Or is it just the lenders getting into it? I don't understand.
It was essentially when the leasing tax credit kind of hit around August of 23.
Oh, okay.
So if you were to look at the end of 2023, the leasing rates certainly rose. Prior to that, leasing on EVs basically followed national averages.
Yeah. Right.
It was a little lower in 2019, but certainly with the tax credit being able to be applied the way it is in the leasing space, like I said, that's what's really driving down those lease payments and why we are seeing, nearly 45% of EVs being purchased as a lease. And there's certain models where the leasing concentration is extremely high. But yes, it's that tax credit coming into play.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it's good. I don't have an EV. It's not something I desire, but I think that it's good to have a lease because that's the way you try things out, new things, and see what you like and expand that market.
Yeah, I think also that certainly comes into play with that comfort level of knowing that, hey, after 2 or 3 years, you don't necessarily have to keep it. You don't have to worry about, the battery after that. You don't have to worry about, the value of the vehicle. You could just turn it in.
And it'll be interesting to see that once with the lease, you'll get to see, and they try it, that the market will do, that you'll have more market determination at that point. I mean, if the person wants to keep it, then you've shown that it's because they like the vehicle. They like.
Absolutely. We do also, I didn't include it in this presentation, but we do also look at loyalty rates, loyalty by manufacturer, loyalty by fuel type. And I have to say, when consumers do own EVs, the loyalty rate to then repurchase or purchase yet another EV, whether it's lease or a loan or cash, is very high. So it seems consumers who like EVs tend to come back and purchase another EV.
Is that more because they want to do the EV thing, or is it the speed, or are they learning, or is it other things about it? I think of maintenance or anything like that. Do you know, or are you just looking at numbers?
We're just looking at the numbers. We'd have to do, consumer sentiment surveys to determine why, there's some EVs where it's, very much lifestyle oriented, experience oriented.
Okay.
yeah, unfortunately, don't know necessarily exactly why behind those.
No, that's okay. I always got to ask. Now, I do see that the share of new EV financing by lender type, captives have like almost 40%, banks 30%, and then down. Now, what's interesting, you have the category buy here, pay here, and other at 15%. Mm-hmm. Well, what's that? Well, I mean, I know buy here, pay here, but I'm saying these are new EVs, so this is interesting.
Yeah, so in this case, it's buy here, pay here / other.
Right.
And so the other it's basically lenders that don't necessarily firmly fit into our other categories of bank, captive, credit union, finance company. And or they could also be lenders that just don't really do a whole lot of volume in the space.
I gotcha.
So it's when there's so many various lien holders that get put on title. I mean, tens of thousands of them. Okay. And so, there's a lot of lenders that might just very miscellaneous. And so that ends up in that category.
Okay, good. And now, and that last thing on that chart, you have the top 20 EV makes, and of course, Tesla is dominant, Ford, Hyundai. That doesn't surprise me, but is there anything that was unexpected on that?
Well, certainly, I mean, Tesla always, forever has been largest market share, but it is now just a little over, almost 52%, whereas, 2-3 years ago, it was in the 70% range.
70%, right,
so
yeah.
Certainly market share is being distributed across, a much broader range of manufacturers.
Yeah, and going into that, you have a chart here on the top 10 new EV models. And so we have Tesla Model Y, Tesla Model 3, Ford Mustang Mach-E, Hyundai Ioniq. And then my interesting one that jumped out at me on number 4 was the Tesla Cybertruck.
Yes.
It's funny. Go ahead.
Yes. So my regular presentation I do quarterly. I always do a top 10 EV. And in Q3, Cybertruck was the number 3 EV in the third quarter. But in the entire year, they did take the number 5 position, a little over 3%. And as you can see, they also get a lot of cash on those vehicles. That one was interesting.
Yeah, it's funny. We're in the Detroit area, and I will see 1 or 2 on the street all the time. And my wife's like, she says, how's that a truck? I say, I have no idea. I haven't actually put my hands on one, but very interesting. And then on this chart, we have like transaction type. And I guess the Hyundai one jumps out because it's like 75% lease. But everything else doesn't jump out as much, I guess. The Model Y is
Prologue. The Prologue is almost 88% leasing. So then that vehicle made the top 10 for the first time.
Okay. I don't have it. It's got cut off from my charger. Wow. 88%. Wow.
Yeah. So, and like I said, the purchase patterns vary quite a bit based on the manufacturer. Certainly what may qualify for some of the tax rebates. There's all of those different criteria elements. But yeah, it's for some of these top 10, you just don't have as much leasing. Like I said, the Cybertruck, there's barely any leasing at all.
Right.
Like 60-40 loan lease. Model Y is, about 19%. Model Y ends up being, the number 1 leased EV, but that's just sheer volume.
Yeah, right. Because it's the number one anyways. Yeah. But yeah, interesting. I guess a Tesla Cybertruck, I would think too, you're committed to that one if you want it. I don't think that's something you kind of, test it out for a lease or something, So you also look at luxury EV buyers, which of course we know that's where the heart of it is. Of those buying almost 19% cash, 30% lease, and loans on 51%. I'm looking at these for the new luxury electric models. Tesla Y is number 1 at like 47%. Tesla Model 3 is 18%. Tesla Model X, the Cybertruck, Rivian, BMW, so on. For this one, I don't know if anything jumped out at me. I see the BMWs, and the BMWs are heavily on the lease side. Like, holy cow, like hugely.
Yeah, a lot of leasing on those. Also the EQE, Mercedes, that one almost 93% lease. Yeah, I mean, overall, when I was looking at, I've also got a section on the non-luxury, and one thing certainly noticed on the luxury side is, leasing is higher than the national average. National average right now is about 25%, but it's not nearly as high as the overall leasing in the non-luxury space. And I think a lot of that is you do tend to see higher rates of leasing on the newer models. The models that have been around a little bit longer, you don't have as much leasing on those.
Okay. So these are people wanting to the next best thing type of thing.
Yep.
Okay. And so overall, the next chart was average difference between loan and lease payment. These are big numbers. I mean, to me, someone leasing, I'm leasing a Chevy, so what are jumping out at you on these lease payments compared to loan payments on them?
So I think the biggest thing that stood out to me in the luxury category was, yes, in some of the instances, the loan to lease payment can be pretty sizable. You've got, some of these examples like Rivian, for example, the R1S, $883 for a lease, over $1,200 on a loan. So pretty big differences. But when you look at the entire group of luxury, the payment difference wasn't as big. It was $121 difference.
It's not huge at all. Yeah.
It isn't. I mean, in the entire lease market, usually the difference between a loan and a lease is around $150, but certainly some models, several $100s, right. As is very evident here. But it also, what stands out is some of these lease payments, how low they can be. Model 3, our decoding will classify the Model 3 as a luxury. Not everyone would classify the Model 3 as a luxury.
Right.
But the lease was $444 on average.
That is I was looking at that.
Below, significantly below national average, which, national average lease, I think, is around $595. Certainly, the affordability aspect with leasing is what really was highlighted here.
The 38th Automotive Outlook Conference, hosted by the Society of Automotive Analysts, highlighted key trends in the auto industry. Bill Renna of Global Data noted improved inventory levels and affordability driving U.S. sales, with a 3% growth in 2024 and modest long-term growth expected. Michael Robinette of S&P Global Mobility discussed shifting OEM strategies, particularly in BEV production, with China leading globally while Europe and North America face uncertainties due to unclear regulations. Colin Langan of Wells Fargo emphasized affordability challenges, with rising competition from Tesla and Rivian adding pressure. Overall, the industry faces both recovery and uncertainty. A federal court vacated the FTC's proposed CARS rule, which aimed to overhaul automotive retail processes, but faced backlash for bypassing public input and imposing significant costs on dealers and consumers. The court ruled the FTC violated its own regulations by not issuing an advance notice of proposed rulemaking. Industry groups like NADA and NIADA celebrated the decision, citing the rule's potential harm to the car buying experience. However, experts warn the fight may continue, with the FTC potentially appealing or states adopting similar regulations. Dealers remain cautious as the regulatory landscape evolves. The auto industry faces uncertainty as a 10% tariff on Chinese imports takes effect, while President Trump pauses proposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico after border enforcement agreements. China retaliated with 15% tariffs on U.S. energy imports. Industry groups like NIADA and NADA express concerns over rising costs and supply chain disruptions, warning tariffs could worsen vehicle affordability and impact jobs. Cox Automotive estimates that 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico would have affected $309 billion in trade, or 40% of the U.S. new vehicle market, with significant implications for auto parts and repair shops.
So speaking of affordability, we got in the non-luxury EVs. Consumers are using cash about 10% of the time, lease 63% of the time, in loans just under 30%. And for those listening, the top new non-luxury electric models are the Ford Mustang Mach-E, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, Ford Lightning F-150, Kia EV9, Volkswagen ID4, Nissan, and so on.
I think the non-luxury, this is really where the sheer amount of leasing was what was surprising. I mean, some of these models, extremely high rates of leasing.
Wow,
overall. Yeah. There's some, the Nissan 83%, the Toyota, BZ4X, over 85%.
Kia EV
But
77%.
yeah,
Wow.
just the overall fact that, in the non-luxury space, leasing was 63% of the market. So quite a bit higher than the luxury category. And obviously, when we start looking at payments, it really, that lease really brings those payments down. And I do think it's the non-luxury category. Again, it's a more affordable vehicle, but I think this is also where the tax credit on the lease side is really pushing, bringing the adoption in and making the vehicles very affordable.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens when they come back. It's very going to be interesting to see how that market works. Because you said, we went to the next chart, it says the average difference between loan and lease payment non-luxury EVs is it 331? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And anything jump out at you that? Because I didn't see any gigantic numbers, I guess, or differences, I guess, on the Nissan maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's over the entire category. The difference is, over $300. Some of the models like Ioniq, $418 versus $770. So, several $100 there. The EV9 also over $300 difference. Yeah. So this is where, but again, you look at some of these lease payments and, you're $418 for the Ioniq, you're, under $400 for the Nissan.
Really? Wow. Yeah, that's wow.
Yeah. So there's very, very low payments. And even the loan payments in this space are quite very similar to national averages, which, last year was right around, $725, $730. And these payments really line up right with that.
So here's where a lot of our readers will be interested is how are used EVs being purchased?
Yeah, so on the used side, there's very little leasing, and there's very little leasing for the used market anyway.
In general, yeah.
Used EVs, you see a lot more cash. You get 42% cash, 54% loan. And this is, like I said, we wrapped up last year with almost 373,000 used EVs. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it basically doubles every year. And
right.
One thing to keep in mind is what we're going to be looking at this year and also next year, used EVs coming back, the off-lease EVs. The EV space is a little bit different on leasing, whereas, in the ICE categories and the other fuel types, you typically most commonly see leasing at 36%.
Right.
Or, I'm sorry, 36 months.
Right.
Yeah, and so they come back, 3 years. In EV, there's a lot of 24-month leasing. So you get a lot of 24s. You also get a lot of 36. But when the leasing rate started to go up at the end of 23, that means these cars are starting to come back towards the end of this year. We do get some early turn-ins and things like that. But, starting later this year and especially moving into next year, we're going to get a lot more used EVs coming back, especially this past year. EV represented about 19% of the entire lease market. So basically will translate to about 1 in 5 vehicles coming off lease is going to be an EV.
And with those incentives probably falling off on the new, it would be really interesting to see how that affects the used prices of EVs in the market. On the EVs by purchase type, finance type, you talked about more being purchased by cash. Does that have to do with the residuals? I mean, or is it just the nature of a used EV?
I think it's pretty much the nature of the market.
Okay.
You do get for the entire used market, you basically see about 65% cash.
Okay.
That's across all model years. Obviously EVs aren't going to go back as old. But based on the mix of the vehicles, it's a lot of, late model Teslas, but, you also start getting back to 2013, 2015. And, the older the vehicle, the less likely you are to even find financing on it. A lot of traditional lenders will just pretty much focus on late model or maybe go back 8, maybe 10 years. But I think just overall, you do just see a lot more cash in the used vehicle space. So that pretty much lines up with kind of what you expect to see here.
Okay, good. And then this was a good question you had on one of your charts. Do EV owners keep their loans open longer than gas vehicle owners? And what did you find out?
They do. So looked at close rates. So basically originations from 2019 and forward. So which is where, you start getting more EV volume. And I looked at it EV compared to gas across the different terms. So, 60-month term versus 72. And if for example, we just look at, the most common loan term out there is 72 months. So if we look at the loans originated during this period for 72 months on gas, when we looked at the end of 2024, little over 36% of the gas vehicle loans had closed.
I see.
So, they were closed by that term. We haven't fulfilled that term completely as of 24. But for the EV owners, only 26% had closed. And then we also looked at, of those that closed, on average, how many months were they open? And looked at that by origination year, and pretty much all up until 2022. And obviously that's when values started changing and the market was just very different starting in 2022. But in general, the consumers who did close kept their EV loans open a couple months longer than the gas counterparts.
Is that just keeping up with payments? I mean, or is that something else?
I think some of it could be consumer satisfaction. I've read various surveys that do consumer satisfaction by fuel type, and
I got you.
Tend to get very high rates. But it's just what really just stands out is just more of them are staying in their loans longer. They're closing early at a lower rate than gas buyers.
Perfect. And related to that, near the end here, where the EV owners tend to have the lowest levels of delinquency, you say?
Yes. And that's historically been true. Right. And, obviously, new car buyers are very, very prime. And up until very recently, EV buyers tended to have the highest credit scores. They are coming down. And I compared the various fuel types, basically, EV, the plug-in, hybrid, and gas. And across all of those fuel types on new and used, the EV buyers had some of the best performance. On new, they were very similar to the plug-in, almost, same levels of delinquency.
Okay.
But the delinquency was a third of that in EV compared to gas.
It's interesting. I wonder how that happened, if maintenance has an issue with it, because I know there's less maintenance on the thing, and maybe they're better off. I don't know. That's interesting, though. It could be just the nature of the buyer or the consumer of that vehicle. Mm-hmm. The last big chart you have is, while EV tends to perform better, plug-in hybrids and hybrids owners perform better than EV, you mentioned. Is that right?
Yeah, that's in the near prime space. So, I looked at, especially when you start moving into near prime, subprime. So you would naturally expect to see higher levels of delinquency in near prime and in subprime. But what was interesting was, if you look at that near prime consumer, and these are credit scores, 600 to 660.
Okay.
And in this category, it was actually hybrid for new car buyers. Hybrid performed the best, followed by the plug-in, then EV, and then finally the gas vehicles. So even still, EV was better performing than gas. It was still a couple other classifications that performed a bit better.
Well, you think hybrid's up there because it's been around a long time, longer, and with the Prius?
It very well could be. Again, this is a bigger pool, so they've been around longer. Mm-hmm. Credit scores are still very high on hybrid buyers. But again, it could also be different consumer mixes, because when you just look at it outside of credit, the EV does perform the best. But again, this kind of lower credit score tier, you don't get as good a performance in the EV space.
Okay, excellent. Boy, now we've kind of gone through the report. Now that you've done this, and I know, again, like you said, and we've talked about it. We watched it. There was a time where you didn't have EVs in the report. Then you had EVs added into your regular finance report. Now you have the special one. Doing this for that first time, what did you like about it? I mean, what did you get out of it, I guess?
I thought it was very interesting, looking at the purchase patterns and adoption rates by the various makes and models, and especially breaking it out between luxury and non-luxury.
Yes.
That to me was very interesting. And I think it does explain quite a lot around the affordability and, the credit scores coming down a little bit of just having some of these models, at price points that are, extremely attractive.
Going forward, is this something obviously, I'm sure you'll probably do this annually. Will it become a bigger part of the quarterly finance state of automotive finance report that you guys do? Or
it could be. It could be. I only have an EV section in the quarterly report on the new vehicle side. Right. As the used vehicle side continues to grow, I'll probably throw in a little bit on that. And I think actually this year, probably at the end of this year, which would be really beginning of next year, I'll have a bigger portion focused on the used side of the EV market.
Yeah, we'll definitely like to follow up with that. And to end here, is there anything you haven't? We kind of went through a lot. Is there anything that you wanted to say that I didn't ask you about?
No, I think we covered everything in really pretty good detail.
Yeah, great. Now, I wanted to ask you, and for the record, our listeners know, Melinda will always say this, she's not a fortune teller or prognosticator. She's a data person. But I am curious, now that we have this new administration, you're going to see, a pullback on mandates or tax rebates that on EVs. Without obviously making predictions, but just from your personal experience, when you do stuff like that, we kind of take down incentives, what might you expect? Obviously, originations will probably be affected, but what might you expect happen, possibilities that you would see?
Yeah, I would expect the leasing rates to change quite a bit in the EV space, because like I said, as soon as the tax credit could get applied on leasing where income was no longer a criteria, that is when the leasing rates accelerated dramatically. Mm-hmm. So I would expect leasing to really be impacted. And, obviously from the rates that we saw in the non-luxury space, I think that's an area that'll be hit a little harder on those. But then again, also it's non-luxury. So there very well could be a larger consumer base where the income cap is not, was not a factor. But then again, if the entire credit goes away, that could certainly change things. There's still potentially state credits that can come into play.
Oh, that's a good point.
The fate of those is kind of outside of, federal control. Mm-hmm. But that, of course, you would expect to see the payments increase as well. Mm-hmm. So that being said, when monthly payments go up, chances are, credit scores will also probably increase a little bit. So fewer near prime consumers able to, move into the EV space.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because I mean, in this country, there's never a pure market, supply and demand thing, but it'd be interesting to see how that does affect them, because you have so much incentives, that's really hard to look at it clearly. But from us, from used car news side, seeing these influx of lease returns at a time when these incentives might go away in the new, it'd be very interesting to see what it does in terms of people demand for used EVs and then pricing as well.
Yeah, it will be interesting, but also you have to look at, there's this year is certainly more impacted by fewer off-lease vehicles anyway, because of the low lease levels from a handful of years ago. So last time I looked at the numbers, just from coming off lease on the retail side, I think 2025 was looking at like 1.3 million fewer off-lease vehicles.
Wow.
So that results in, fewer late model vehicles. Mm-hmm. The EVs coming off lease, the bigger volume of that's going to hit later this year and into next. So, again, there's just going to be a greater percentage of, of EVs making up the late model vehicles.
Okay, cool. Oh my goodness, Melinda, always enjoy talking to you, always learn a lot. And I'm glad that we did this, because I know you kind of hinted that this might be coming up at some point, a report, specifically directed at EVs. And so I look forward to seeing what you got coming up next. I'm sure if we'll talk at some point again this year. But Melinda Zabritski of Experian, thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Have a good one, folks. I'll see you next time on Used Car News Podcast.
Thanks for listening to Used Car News Podcast. Each month, we'll bring you fast and reliable news that car dealers can rely on for this evolving industry. For a free subscription of Used Car News, please go to usedcarnews.com. This podcast is a production of BG Ad Group. Make sure to share us on social media and like and follow wherever you get your podcasts.